The Philadelphia Eagles finally received some of the injury news they had been waiting for, and it could have a major impact as the team moves closer to the regular season. After missing a significant portion of training camp with a hamstring injury, first-round wide receiver Makai Lemon was listed as a full participant in practice, marking the first time in several weeks that he has reached that status. Even more importantly, Lemon was not simply going through individual work. He was back in pads, participating in team drills, and working with the first-team offense alongside Devonta Smith and Deantavion Wicks. That is a very important development for Philadelphia because Lemon was not drafted simply to be another name in the receiver room. The Eagles moved up to select him in the first round after seeing what he accomplished at USC, where he established himself as one of the top wide receivers in college football and won the Biletnikoff Award. The organization clearly believed in his talent during the pre-draft process, and that decision became even more significant because the Eagles knew A.J. Brown would eventually leave Philadelphia and join the New England Patriots. That means there is a major expectation surrounding Lemon. Philadelphia needs him to become an important part of the offense and help replace some of the production and explosiveness that Brown brought to the team. And after what Brown showed during the joint practices between the Eagles and Patriots, it is obvious that replacing him will not be an easy task. The biggest concern with Lemon has never been his talent, it has been his hamstring. This is not the first time he has dealt with an injury to that same hamstring. He suffered an injury while at USC, then dealt with another issue involving the same hamstring during the spring, and then injured it again during training camp. He missed around 10 practices because of the latest setback, making today's return especially significant. Soft tissue injuries can become frustrating because the biggest concern is always the possibility of re-injury. Lemon himself acknowledged that he needs to be more professional moving forward to avoid these types of injuries. Whatever he meant by that, the Eagles have consistently heard positive things about his work ethic, and Sean Mannion has described Lemon as someone who has been extremely engaged with the playbook even while he was unable to practice. Now, the Eagles are finally getting the opportunity to see what he can actually do within the offense. His first target in team drills did not go perfectly. Lemon dropped a pass on a crossing route, and there may also have been some communication and timing issues between him and Jalen Hurts. But that is exactly why these practice reps are so important. Lemon has been away from the field for a long time, and he and Hurts need to build that chemistry. If you ask Lemon, he would probably be the first person to say that he should have made the catch, but the next play showed exactly why Philadelphia was so excited to draft him. Lemon caught a bubble screen and immediately displayed the burst, creativity, and physical ability that made him so dangerous at USC. This is the type of play that can become a regular part of the Eagles' offensive attack. The play itself is not revolutionary. Teams throughout the NFL use bubble screens. What makes the difference is the player receiving the ball. Philadelphia wants the ball in Lemon's hands because of what he can potentially do after the catch. His speed and explosiveness can turn a simple completion into a significant gain, and that gives the offense another weapon that defenses have to account for. And this is where the timing of his return becomes so important. The Eagles are only 2 preseason games into the process, and the regular season is getting closer. There is still time for Lemon to get more comfortable with the offense, develop timing with Hurts, and establish himself alongside Smith and Wicks. His return does not suddenly solve every question surrounding the receiving core, but it gives Philadelphia something it desperately needed, another opportunity to see what this offense can look like when its most important pieces are actually on the field together. There were also several other injury developments that Eagles fans need to watch closely. Marquil Bell, who was selected in the 3rd round out of Miami and has had an impressive summer, is dealing with thumb and leg injuries. Jacorian Bennett is dealing with a knee issue. Grant Calcaterra remains out with a back injury. Jonathan Jones continues to deal with a shoulder injury, and Willie Lamp is dealing with a stinger. MJ Devonshire has another shoulder injury. Eli Stowers is dealing with a hamstring issue. Ambry Thomas has a groin injury. Quez Watkins is dealing with a foot injury, and Cole Wisniewski is dealing with a concussion. The situation involving Wisniewski could be particularly important for the roster because there is a belief that he could eventually land on season-ending injured reserve. That would allow Philadelphia to avoid using one of its active roster spots on the 7th round pick out of Texas Tech. The Eagles also made roster roster moves at safety and running back, and those moves appear connected to what has been happening throughout the summer. Andrew Makuba has continued to take steps forward, Michael Carter the Cat has played well, and Kavon Wallace has been getting work at safety. UDFA Maxon Hook has also impressed, while another safety, CJ Gardner-Johnson, has been part of the competition in the room. With several players making a strong impression, Philadelphia released veteran safety JT Gray, a player known primarily for his impact on special teams. Running back Jackendon Jackson was also waived injured after suffering an injury on the opening kickoff against New England and being taken to the hospital. If another team does not claim him, he is expected to land on the Eagles' season-ending injured reserve. But perhaps one of the most interesting developments from practice involved the quarterback position. Andy Dalton did not begin practice as the second-team quarterback. Instead, Tanner McKee took the second-team reps behind Hurts. That is worth paying attention to because McKee has been viewed as a strong option for the backup role, and these reps give him another opportunity to demonstrate why he belongs in that position. The Eagles will have to make a decision at quarterback behind Hurts, and every preseason practice and game matters as those roster battles become more serious. At the same time, Hurts has experienced something unusual during training camp: interceptions. He has thrown 11 interceptions during the camp period, a number that immediately jumps off the page because he had only 11 interceptions combined over the previous 2 seasons. That sounds concerning, and there is no reason to pretend otherwise. But there is another way to look at it. Hurts may be testing the limits of the offense. Instead of always playing conservatively, he has been willing to push the ball downfield and find out what works and what does not within the new system. That can be useful during training camp, but the Eagles obviously do not want those risky decisions to become a regular season problem, and that leads directly into one of the most encouraging developments from the first 2 preseason games: the early signs of what Sean Mannion's offense could become. The Eagles have kept things relatively vanilla so far, but the design of some of these plays is already showing a clear emphasis on purposeful pre-snap motion and route combinations designed to create space. One example came against New England. Britton Covey went in motion before the snap, and the movement forced the defense to react. The Eagles then used crossing routes to create a difficult decision for the safety. Instead of simply asking a receiver to beat his man one-on-one, the design created uncertainty for the defense and opened a throwing lane for the quarterback. The result was a completion to Darius Cooper for a big gain that helped set up a touchdown scoring drive. It may sound simple, but that simplicity is exactly what makes the concept effective. The motion has a purpose. The routes work together. One receiver's movement can create an opportunity for another receiver. And most importantly, the design can make the quarterback's job easier. That is something Eagles fans should be watching very closely as the preseason continues. There are also reasons to be excited about the defensive line. Joshua Uche has continued to show positive signs, and OJ Bernard, an international pathway player, is also making progress. Uche produced 2 pressures and a quarterback hit in his first football game against Baltimore, and in his second game, he recorded his first preseason sack. The sack itself showed why Philadelphia may have something interesting developing. Uche used an inside-outside move against the tackle, forced him to lean inside, then used his length, speed, and burst to get around the edge. He bent the corner and finished the play with the sack. For a player still developing, those are exactly the kinds of flashes the Eagles want to see. Bernard is much more raw, but his progress from one game to the next has been noticeable. He does not yet have the lateral quickness or complete pass rush arsenal, but at around 300 pounds, he has tremendous power and very strong hands. He has already shown the ability to move large offensive linemen with his strength, and considering that the Patriots game was only his second football game, there is plenty of room for development. That creates another difficult roster decision for Howie Roseman. If Uche continues showing this kind of potential at a premium position, the Eagles may have to think very carefully before exposing him to waivers. So, with the 3rd preseason game approaching against the Cincinnati Bengals, Philadelphia suddenly has a lot to watch. Lemon is finally back as a full participant. The offense is beginning to show signs of a different identity. Hurts is testing the limits of the new system. The receiver room is taking shape. The defensive line continues to look promising, and several young players are forcing the Eagles to make difficult decisions about the final roster. The biggest question now is whether these encouraging preseason signs can turn into something meaningful when when the games actually count. Eagles fans, after seeing Mekhi Lemon finally return to full participation, the early signs from Sean Mannion's offense, and the development of these young players, what do you think is the biggest reason for optimism right now? Philadelphia Eagles' young talent is turning the preseason into a serious roster battle, and that is exactly why the final preseason game is becoming so important for Philadelphia, because these decisions are no longer just about finding players who can survive on the roster. The Eagles are starting to see young players give them legitimate reasons to keep them, and that creates a very different problem for Howie Roseman and the coaching staff. Look at what is happening along the defensive front. Joshua Uche is not simply getting snaps and hoping to make the team, he is creating plays. In his first game against Baltimore, he already showed pressure and a quarterback hit. Then, in his second game, he took another step forward by recording his first preseason sack. The sack itself tells you a lot about the player Philadelphia is developing. Uche lined up on the left edge and attacked the right tackle with an inside-outside move. He showed the tackle the possibility of going inside, got him leaning in that direction, and then suddenly exploded back outside. His stride length, speed, and burst allowed him to turn the corner before the tackle could recover. That is the kind of natural ability that is difficult to teach. What makes the situation even more interesting is that Uche is still learning the game. He is not a finished product, and that is why the Eagles have to look at the potential as much as the current production. If he continues to develop, Philadelphia could have another young defensive player capable of contributing in a premium position. And then there is Bernard, who is a completely different type of developmental story. Bernard is still extremely raw. He does not have the lateral quickness you would want from a polished defensive lineman, and he still needs to build a larger pass rush arsenal, but the progress has been visible. From his first preseason game to his second, there were clear signs that he was learning and becoming more comfortable. Remember, this is not a